Welcome back. Let's continue our conversation about student engagement and total participation techniques. Take a look in detail at the TPT quadrant sort that's on your video now. First of all, let's take a look at the arrow going up and down. Higher order thinking at the top, lower order thinking at the bottom. Educators today must be cognizant of the level of cognition they're asking students to function at through the activities they're providing, the questions they're asking, and the dialogue that they're supporting. Students must learn the information at the lower order thinking level. However, as they progress in their understanding, educators must move the students to higher and higher levels of thinking through the projects, activities, and engagement strategies they choose. On the arrow going from left to right in the middle of your screen, you'll see low participation and high participation. As you reflect on those two elements, if you would evaluate your classroom, if you would video a class for an hour out of the day tomorrow, where would your classroom fall? Would you have low participation, calling on only on a few number of students throughout that hour? Or would you have high participation in which all students get the opportunity to process and engage in the learning? So the TPT researchers took the higher order, lower order thinking and low and high participation and developed a quadrant sort for us so we can identify where our activities and engagement strategies fall. If you're in quadrant 1, the activities you're providing to your students are low in cognition and have very little participation, or very few students are participating in those activities. If we move over to quadrant 2, we're still at the lower level of thinking, the lower level of Bloom's, possibly at remembering and understanding, simply having students regurgitate information back to us, but we have high participation. In quadrant 2 is where direct instruction must start. We have to start at the remembering and understanding level, but we need to have high participation. When we look at quadrant 3, where we're asking students to function at the upper level of Bloom's, so analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, creating, that's a good thing. But then in quadrant 3, we have low participation. So we're only asking a few of our students out of the whole to participate in the high cognition engagement. Quadrant 4 is where we ultimately need to land with our lessons, where we're having high participation and high cognition, asking the majority or all of students to participate in the learning at a high level of cognition. Again, an opportunity you might have is to take any lesson that you have and analyze it around these quadrants. Where would it fall? And more importantly, what changes can you make in that lesson that would move us to quadrant 2 at the beginning of the lesson and quadrant 4 by the end of the lesson? Important information for teachers to know. Another engagement strategy I would encourage you to try is called A talk and B respond. In this strategy, you have partners of A and B. This could be around a specific text that they have read, or it can be how they respond to the questions at the end of the chapter, or it might be how they answer and dialogue on questions you pose to them as a group. In this strategy, after the question is posed or the text is read, A talks around what they've been asked or what they've learned. B then pauses and responds. That response can be directed by you. They might pose a question back. B might add additional information, or B might paraphrase or summarize what A said. So in the B response, you are welcome to make that more detailed and provide a specific prompt to B. Then they'd read a next section of the text, and B will talk, and A will respond. This allows students not only to break up large chunks of text and think and process around those small chunks instead of reading the entire chapter, and they may not remember anything that they read at the beginning. A talk and B respond supports the learning theory that learners learn by talking. When we ask A's and B's in small groups to talk and respond, it engages the learning at a higher level, and we have high participation. So if we go back to this slide, we are either in quadrant 2 or 4, depending on the level of cognition you're asking students to function on. Handout 3 describes A talk and B responds within the course materials. So earlier I introduced a beach ball, and I said, as I have observed classrooms across the state, that I have noticed that I believe teachers are using the beach ball effect, and that is come up with a question, toss the ball out, and one person answers, leaving the rest of the students without the opportunity to respond. Now I present you the visual of a ripple. In the Total Participation Techniques book, they suggest that we ensure that all students are reflecting on and responding to the prompt or to the questions. And I encourage you to consider you ripple your questions. Rather than using the traditional question and answer approach, question posed, one student answer, rippling begins with every student responding individually to the prompt, then sharing their response in pairs or small groups, then followed by volunteers sharing their answer with the class. We call this the ripple because it starts with the entry of the pebble in the water or your question or prompt into which every individual student responds. And then it ripples out in that manner in which we dialogue in pairs, and then we move to whole group. So take a look at this. Step 1, all students respond individually to the higher order prompt. That might be on a walking whiteboard, it might be in a quick write, it might be in their head. But in some way, all students, we pause, and all students have the opportunity to think about the question or the prompt. Step 2, students share their responses in pairs or small groups. There we're bringing in the research on the cone of learning. When they have an opportunity to talk about it, they remember more in 2 weeks than they do if they just hear it. And then you move to volunteers or selected students sharing out. You might do that in a random call out. It might be in some manner you select students who are going to share out. In all of this process, I want to remind you of the concept of wait time. Educators need to recognize that everyone processes at a different rate. Wait time, according to the research of Mary Budrow, is critical to allow all students the opportunity to process information and come up with a response. When we put wait time in play, and original research says 3 to 5 seconds of wait time, the newest research says 10 to 5 seconds of wait time because of EL students. When teachers wait, students produce higher level responses in more complete sentences and richer, deeper responses. In conclusion on the ripple effect, one of the things teachers need to remove from their vocabulary is the statement, "Who can tell me?" Who might respond? When we pose that question, we are looking for one student to answer. We need to pose the question in the ripple effect so that all students process and respond individually. Students share in pairs or small groups, and then we call out. So remove from your vocabulary, "Who can tell me?" Let's move to having all students engaged in thinking and responding to the questions, the prompts, and the content we present to them. Next engagement strategy, I'm using a graphic organizer. If you look in the center of this graphic organizer, you will see the words engagement strategy with spokes coming out around it. You can enter the topic that you're studying in the center of that circle and have students list on the spokes those things that they have learned. This is an excellent way to wrap up the day, to wrap up the week. So students in pairs or small groups would enter on those spokes the things we've learned today. So for example, if we were doing one on the content we've covered so far, we might put on a spoke the cone of learning. Another spoke we might put TPT quadrants. Another spoke we might put 3 to get ready. This allows students to wrap up their learning and think about what they've learned and how it might apply. Then when they get home and their parents say, "What'd they do today?" you've given them the words to share. Another way I've seen a teacher use this is a calendar method. I observed this in a kindergarten classroom in a district in southwest Kansas. The teacher had created a calendar that was about 4 foot by 3 foot for the month. At the end of each day, the kindergarten teacher did circle time around the calendar, and she asked the students to think about what they'd learned today, share with a partner what they'd learned today, and then she called on students in a whole group format, and she would bullet list those items that kids shared. That was such a powerful tool as an observer and for those students when I entered the classroom towards the end of the month. I could see a clear picture of everything that kindergarten class had learned over the course of that month. In summary, this is the graphic organizer and the calendar method are ways for students to reflect and check for understanding and be engaged around the content of their learning. Pause and think about the information provided in this segment of the Kokopelli course. What changes do you need to make in instruction? How might you adjust your lesson design to incorporate the things covered in this section?